It was a silent night, the kind of night when even the noises of the city seemed to respect the sleep of its residents. Inside an apartment on the 4th floor of a residential tower, a refrigerator gave its last gasp of operation. A discreet, almost imperceptible short circuit generated the spark. In seconds, heat built up. In minutes, all hell had broken loose. The fire found an easy path to spread. The facade of the building, covered in shiny aluminum sheets with a plastic core, seemed to be made of fuel. The flames climbed the building with fury, taking floor after floor as if guided by invisible hands. In just 12 minutes, the fire had already climbed 19 floors. Inside the apartments, chaos was breaking loose. People woke up to the smell of smoke, to the muffled sound of explosions and screams coming from outside. Some ran to the doors, only to find hallways filled with toxic smoke and unbearable heat. Others, not knowing what to do, called emergency services. Some prayed. Many waited for instructions that never came. The official orders were clear. Stay in your apartments. This was the recommended policy for tall buildings. The theoretical insulation should protect against the spread of fire. But not in this tower. The structure had become a vertical trap. Entire families found themselves trapped. Mothers with babies in their arms screamed for help through the windows. Children cried, huddled in corners. People with reduced mobility had no way to go down the stairs, nor did they know that the fire had already exceeded all expected limits. Down below, the firefighters faced an apocalyptic scene. The water seemed insignificant compared to the strength of the flames. The wind spread the fire even faster, turning the building into a beacon of despair, illuminating the night. Inside the building, the minutes became eternal. Many residents refused to believe what they were seeing. The fire seemed to be coming down from the walls. Fire doors that were supposed to contain the heat failed. There were no sprinklers, no efficient alarms, no real chance of defense. The building was doomed, and no one had been warned. In the darkness, anonymous heroes emerged. Neighbors knocked on each other's doors, ignoring the smoke, to try to save strangers. There were those who carried elderly people on their shoulders, those who handed their children through the window to strangers on lower floors. Others, with no other option, said goodbye to their loved ones over the phone, their voices fading away amid the noise of destruction. When day broke, the building was still smoking. The silence of the morning contrasted violently with the screams of the previous night. On the ground, among the rubble, the first bodies began to appear. In the sky, the black smoke did not cease. The tragedy had been consummated, but the worst was yet to come. The first firefighters arrived quickly. They took no more than 6 minutes after the alarm was raised. But when they arrived, they realized something that would change everything. The fire was not just internal. The entire facade of the building was already burning like a torch. The fire was advancing with unthinkable speed, defying all known protocols. What was supposed to be a containment operation turned into a desperate fight against time and against death. Inside, residents were still waiting for instructions. The official recommendation remained the same. Stay where you are. In theory, the apartments should offer protection for at least an hour. But that tower did not follow any theory. Toxic smoke seeped through the cracks in the doors. The walls were heating up. The air became unbreathable. Those who obeyed were trapped. Small children screamed. Elderly people tried to move in the darkness. People with disabilities could not even reach the door. In many homes, the only means of contact with the outside world was their cell phones. Calls for help multiplied. Desperate calls flooded the emergency lines. Some operators listened helplessly to the last moments of entire families. Meanwhile, the firefighters faced impossible obstacles. The ladders reached as far as the 10th floor. The fire had already gone beyond that. The water could barely touch the flames that licked the upper floors. The equipment was not designed for a fire of that type. The building had become a vertical battlefield where each flight of stairs cost lives. Many only survived because they disobeyed, because they went from door to door, ignoring the order to stay in their apartments. Neighbors warned each other. Some fled with what they could carry, children in their arms, elderly people on their shoulders, dogs in their arms. Some descended dozens of floors in the dark, amidst thick smoke and screams of despair, not knowing if they would escape. Amid the chaos, the building revealed its worst flaw. It had never been prepared for a fire. There were no sprinklers to contain the flames at the beginning. The fire doors failed, the escape routes were not clearly marked, and the cladding, the same one that had been installed in a recent renovation to beautify the facade, was now burning like paper. When the first reports began to appear in the newspapers, the scale of the tragedy was still unknown. But the numbers began to emerge. 72 lives, 24 floors of suffering, entire families lost. Children, babies, people with reduced mobility, neighbors, workers, students, grandparents, all consumed by a fire that could have been prevented. For those who escaped, survival brought guilt. For those who lost someone, there was nothing left but emptiness. What happened that night was more than an accident. It was a collapse of everything that was supposed to protect a community. And yet, the deepest pain was yet to come, discovering that none of this was really unexpected. Someone already knew and did nothing. Long before that tragic dawn, the tower's fate was already being slowly sealed by administrative decisions, tight budgets, and choices made far from the residents' eyes. The tower, built decades earlier, was undergoing a renovation that was promised to be necessary and beneficial. It would be a project of renovation, modernization, and aesthetic improvement. But behind the scenes, what was being implemented was a trap disguised as progress. The central point of the renovation was the installation of an external aluminum composite cladding with a polyethylene core. This material, known by the acronym ACM, was cheap, lightweight, and offered an elegant finish. But it was also flammable, extremely flammable. Safety tests carried out since 2005 had already indicated that the use of this material on the facades of tall buildings posed a lethal risk. Even so, it was chosen and installed. Floor by floor, panel by panel. Those responsible knew. Internal reports warned of the danger. Consultants suggested safer, but more expensive alternatives. But cost-cutting prevailed. Economy prevailed over caution. Decisions were made not based on safety, but on budget. Purchasing committees accepted low-value proposals, even though they were aware of the consequences. Building management and contractors prioritized financial results. Risk became a detail. During the renovation process, residents expressed concerns. Some questioned the lack of sprinklers, the slow response to maintenance requests, the growing insecurity of the structure. Nothing was done. The voices of the community were ignored or silenced. The responses always came with the same bureaucratic tone. Everything was within the standards. The external appearance of the building mattered more than the protection of those who lived inside. The cruelest thing about this story is that the tragedy was not just the result of an accident. It was built brick by brick, decision by decision, omission by omission. Every penny saved in the choice of cladding cost a life. Every ignored email, every filed report, every downplayed alert added fuel to that night. And most alarmingly, the tower was not the only one. The material used was common in hundreds of other buildings. The practice of cutting costs with safety was common. Suppliers continued to sell the flammable cladding even after tests showed its danger. In the name of profit, the risk was accepted. In the name of aesthetics, the trap was camouflaged. In the name of economy, the fate of dozens of families was sealed. When the building caught fire, it was not just the failure of a refrigerator that fueled the flames. It was the sum of years of institutional negligence, of cold-blooded corporate decisions, of a culture that devalues human life. The tragedy of the tower was not inevitable. It was planned unintentionally. It was executed slowly. And above all, it was allowed. When the flames died down and the bodies began to be. Once the victims were identified, a new face of the tragedy emerged. The web of responsibilities that, instead of helping, hid. Mourning gave way to indignation. Families wanted answers. But what they received was a maze of silence, denial, and legal maneuvers. The building burned, and with it, the trust in those who were supposed to protect it. The tower's management company, an organization responsible for administering social housing, quickly claimed to be unaware of the risks. It said it had followed technical guidelines. It shifted the blame to the contractors. The contractors, in turn, blamed the suppliers of the materials. The suppliers accused the consultants. The consultants said they had only suggested options. The circle was complete. No one was taking responsibility. A carousel of blame kept spinning endlessly. Documents disappeared. Emails vanished. Contracts were incomplete. When investigators requested the renovation records, they discovered glaring failures of transparency. The line between error and cover-up became increasingly blurred. There were deliberate omissions. There were decisions hidden from the public. And above all, there was a structure addicted to protecting institutions, not lives. Politicians who had previously ignored the warnings were now outraged. But the families remembered. There had been complaints long before. Residents had already warned about electrical faults, structural risks, and the lack of basic safety measures. A letter sent by a group of residents, months before the fire, explicitly warned about the possibility of a tragedy. No one responded. When the investigation was opened, what was seen was a theater of evasions. Executives said they did not remember. Technicians denied direct involvement. Witnesses protected their companies. Lawyers argued technically about the legality of the decisions. But what the survivors wanted were not legal justifications. They were human answers. To hear that their children's lives were worth no less than budget savings. Meanwhile, the government was slow to act. The replacement of hazardous materials in other buildings was progressing slowly. Legislative reforms were stalled in committees. Many of the families displaced by the tragedy were still waiting for adequate relocation months, even years later. The state, which should have been responsible for the repairs, seemed to be merely reacting. The companies involved continued to operate in the market. Some changed their names. Others signed agreements to limit civil liability. None were banned from public contracts. None have been held criminally liable yet. The eyes of the courts, heavy and slow, seemed not to reach the upper floors where the decisions had been made. The cruelest truth of the tragedy was not only in the flames. It was in the coldness of those who could have prevented everything and chose not to act. In the calculated silence of the corporations, in the strategic omission of the leaders, in the public sector that, faced with the pain, preferred the protection of the system to compassion for the victims. The fire killed 72 people, but it was the institutional silence that killed hope. The building is still standing, a dark, silent tower, covered by hoardings, monitored by cameras, avoided by glances. The structure that once housed families is now a symbol of everything that failed. Years have passed since that dawn, but for the survivors and their families, time has stood still. Each anniversary of the tragedy is a reopened cut. Each unfulfilled promise is more salt in the wound. The tower has become an improvised memorial. Flowers, letters, photos of children, candles lit in silence. A wall in front displays messages of pain, justice and resistance. Many residents want the building to be demolished, but only when there is a dignified way to preserve the memory. Others ask that it remain as a perpetual reminder of what can never happen again. What everyone agrees on is that forgetting would be like killing again. The marks of the tragedy are on their bodies and minds. Many survivors face deep traumas: insomnia, panic, depression, fear of fire, guilt for being alive. Some have never been able to live in tall buildings again. Others have never been able to live at all. The pain of losing children, parents, grandparents, siblings has become a daily companion. There is no therapy that can erase a farewell call made amidst the flames. Official responses have come slowly. A public inquiry produced a report of over 1,700 pages. It contained 58 recommendations. Most were accepted, some only in principle. The slow response of the system is, for many, as painful as the tragedy itself. Criminal proceedings are promised for the coming years, but families are waiting with no certainty. Justice, for them, always seems too late. Meanwhile, other buildings remain at the mercy of the same risk. Around 2,000 public buildings still have similar flammable materials. In more than 500, there is no plan to replace them. The tragedy taught the country something, but not fast enough. Lives are still at risk. Systems continue to fail. The disaster also gave rise to a movement. The End Our Cladding Scandal campaign became a collective voice. Survivors became activists. Communities came together in protests, marches, vigils, and demands. The tragedy, although it destroyed, also revealed a strength that refused to disappear. New legislation began to be debated. New regulatory bodies were created. But it is still not enough. In the end, the inevitable question remains: why did so many people have to die for something to change? And why do so many others still wait for these changes to come? The tower still stands against the sky, not as a home, but as a place of mourning, like an open wound in the heart of a city that failed its own citizens. The fight for justice continues. The pain remains. The memory resists. Because forgetting would be repeating, and repeating would be betraying all the lives lost that night. This story is not just about a fire. It is about ignored voices, negligent decisions, broken promises. It is about what happens when profit is worth more than life. But above all, it is about the strength of a community that refused to disappear in silence. If this story touched you in any way, if it made your heart heavy or your mind reflect, then don't let it fade away. Like the video, it shows the algorithm that this story needs to be told. Comment. We want to know how you felt watching it. And subscribe to the channel so that together we can continue bringing to light stories that should never be forgotten. Because remembering is resisting. And resisting is the first step to change.